Hello everyone and welcome back to our class of International Strategy and to our fifth class today, which is about business model innovation. That's a class I really like, so it's a pity that we cannot have it physically and more interactively together, but we'll try to do our best. So again, I think the slides are quite self-explanatory. There is quite some text, so please read them carefully. You will find attached as well on Lola some extra videos to explain the content and some extra readings of very well-known and classical articles in strategy and business model innovation, essentially from Harvard Business Review. And I will complement by highlighting the main slides and the main concept. So I will not comment everything because sometimes it will be just a bit boring for you, I guess. But I'll try to put all that in perspective. And so before we really dig into business model innovation, I have an introduction about disruption in general. I think an academic that has really put that well in perspective is Tony Seba, and you will find a link to YouTube with one of his videos. And this intro was based on his work and on his introduction, so I will not do it myself. He does it much better than me, and you will watch the video, and I'm pretty sure that by now you know it. But you know, what is a disruption? And you know this introduction, that's a picture of New York in 1900. And the question is, can you find a car? You need to look very carefully, but there is indeed one there, and all the rest, those are horses. And then 13 years later, that's the opposite. Can you find the horse on this picture? And there is one as well there somewhere. And that's illustrate quite well a disruption. And we'll come back to that in a few minutes. Another example that he also explained much better than me is AT&T. In AT&T, in the 90s, they saw the trend of the mobile phone coming, and they asked a study to a very famous consulting firm that's actually also well present in the press at the moment. But they asked a study to know how many mobile phone users will we have in the US by 2000. And so the consultant, they did a very complex study, projection, assumption, scenarios, and they come with the figure of 900,000 users by 2000. And based on those figures, well, AT&T concluded that it was not an attractive market. And so they decided not to invest in mobile phone technology. And then what was the reality? The reality was that in 2000, you had 109 million user in the US. So it was an error by a factor 100, right? Which was clearly a catastrophe. And so that's just an example of a disruption that came and that the company did not see coming. And you have obviously a lot of famous example about it. The most famous one being probably Kodak, that missed the digital photography disruption. Anyway, so you'll see in the video those examples are explained in depth and with a lot of examples. So, what is a disruption? The disruption happens when new products and services create a new market, and in the process significantly weaken, transform, or destroy existing product categories, market, and industry. If you think about the New York example, well, the car it destroyed a bit the horse market, right? And it was a real business at that time. But what it's interesting that because disruption is really a buzzword that you use and that you hear all the time, but it's possible to make it more concrete and specific, and to think about it by the combination of three things. It's the development of new technology at affordable cost. That's what we call technology cost curve. That's the convergence of technology, and that's business model innovation enabled by those technology. And that's when you can have those three elements that you can really have a disruption on the market. And so I'll come back to those three elements that made a disruption. And you'll see that the adaptation of a disruptive innovation is always based on this S-curve. So meaning that you start with 2 or 3% of the market, and then you reach quite quickly 80% market share in a few years and sometimes months. And today it's sometimes even weeks. So first concept, really key, that's technology cost curve. Technology have cost improvement curves. What does it mean? a cost improvement curve shows the rate at which a given technology improves over time. The best known technology cost curve is probably Moore's law. You have probably heard that before. This law postulates that computing power doubles every 2 years or so. And so you'll see that in the SEBA framework, it studies the economic side of those technology improvement curves. That is, it looks at how a given unit improves on a per dollar basis. For example, when analyzing batteries, the metric we may look at is the cost in dollars per kilowatt hour. So that's the example you have here. If you look at the lithium-ion batteries cost curve from 2010 to projection to 2030, well, you see that it has more or less a 20% technology cost curve, which means that the technology would improve by a factor 10 in 10 years. Which, for example, can open up a totally new market and think here, obviously, about electric cars. So that's the first concept, that's technology cost curve. So in 2010, when the cost of a lithium-ion battery was that high, you cannot really develop a market based on that, but as it's become much cheaper, now it becomes possible. The second very important concept, that's technology convergence. What is it? It's when several technology, each one improving at a different rate, converge at a certain point in time to make it possible for new products or services to be developed. The best example of that is obviously the smartphone. So the smartphone, you needed someone very clever, a real visionary like Steve Jobs to develop it, but still it was possible because within months, a set of technology really became affordable and mature more or less at the same time. So to develop a smartphone, you needed to have good battery, you needed to have sensor, you needed to have a good touchscreen, a camera, you needed to have cloud computing, you needed to have connectivity, and all this came together. So the genius was obviously to connect the dot and to make a product out of it, but the fact is that those technologies converge at relatively the same time. So that's the concept of technology convergence. Then you have the concept of S-curve, like I said in the beginning. So disruptive products are always adopted by market following an S-curve. The only difference might be the steep of the growth, so the slope of the growth. So in the beginning, you have a very low share of the market. Then you will reach at some point the tipping point. It's really the moment where the growth accelerates. Before the tipping point, the product is quite stable, stable or low. Then you have the phase of exponential growth, which defines a disruptive trend, and then it will stabilize. And what you see today is that that the curves are steeper and steeper. If we go back to the first one, the telephone, I think, well, telephone, it took quite some time. So you still saw the S curve on the graph. But today, when you launch a new technology, when you look at the smartphone, social media, the adoption rate was much steeper, and that's really, really disruptive. So all together now, if you understand that you need technology cost curve, that you need technology convergence, it's not enough, right? Now you will need to think about your business model and how to use those technology, this convergence, this affordable technology to create new business model and to think about new way of making money. And that will be now the zoom and the focus of this class, but I wanted to do this introduction to show you that disruption, that's a buzzword, but it can be explained with very solid concept, and that business model innovation, that's more than technological innovation, but that technology obviously is a big part of it. And so in the next recording, we will deep into the content, and we will focus mainly on a few definitions, because business model needs to be defined. Few patterns, what are the most common types of business models. Then we will really think about business model innovation, and we will make the link, that's the last chapter, with the organizational impact of those new business models for companies. So bear with me, and we're switching to the next video. Thank you.